A man at the absolute pinnacle of his success, Garrett Montgomery believed he owned the world. He had the penthouse, the private jet, and a wife who was the perfect, elegant accessory to his gilded life. But perfection wasn't enough. In the hushed corner of a Michelin-starred restaurant, he committed the ultimate betrayal, sliding a legendary diamond ring onto the finger of his mistress, a ring with a history as deep and dark as the secrets he kept. He thought it was just another asset, he was moving another conquest. He had no idea that the silent, graceful woman he left at home wasn't just his wife. She was his greatest miscalculation, and she wasn't about to get even, she was about to get everything. The weight of the velvet box in Garrett Montgomery's inner jacket pocket was a familiar sensation. It was the specific gravity of a secret, dense and thrilling. He sat opposite Scarlett Laurent, at a secluded corner table, at per se the city lights of Columbus Circle, a glittering, out-of-focus backdrop to the real main event. Scarlett was 26 in age, that felt both impossibly young and dangerously ambitious. Her eyes, the color of warm honey, were fixed on him, reflecting the candlelight and a hunger he found intoxicating. "You've been quiet tonight, Garrett," she murmured, her fingers tracing the rim of her wine glass. The wine was a 1998 Chateau Margaux, a bottle he'd had the sommelier retrieve from the restaurant's private cellar. It was a wine that cost more than most people's monthly rent, a casual display of the power he wielded. Garrett offered a practiced, charming smile, just admiring the view. He wasn't talking about the city. He was the CEO and founder of Apex Innovations, a tech behemoth he had built from the ground up. His face was a regular feature on the covers of Forbes and Wired. He was 48 years old, with a mane of silvering hair he kept impeccably styled, and the lean, predatory physique of a man who fought time with personal trainers and sheer force of will. He had everything, including a wife, Aurelia, who was, in his estimation, the perfect corporate spouse. She was beautiful, poised from old money, and completely uninterested in the brutal mechanics of his business world. She ran charities, hosted flawless dinner parties, and looked stunning on his arm. She was predictable, and for Garrett, predictability bred complacency. Scarlett was the antidote to that complacency. She was a fiery, unpredictable variable in the otherwise sterile equation of his life. "I have something for you," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. He slid the box across the starched white linen. Scarlett's perfectly glossed lips parted in a silent gasp. She didn't open it immediately, instead, savoring the moment her eyes locked on his. She knew the game. This wasn't a gift of love. It was a transaction. It was a retainer for her time, her affection, her discretion. Garrett. She breathed, her fingers finally closing around the box. She lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of black satin, was the ring. It wasn't just a ring. It was a landmark. A flawless 12-carat cornflower blue sapphire, flanked by 2 pear-shaped diamonds. It was known as the Star of Jaipur, a legendary stone that had been auctioned at Sotheby's just last week, a piece once owned by Indian royalty. The news of its sale for a staggering $4.2 million had been a small item in the society pages. Tears welled in Scarlett's eyes. Genuine or not, it hardly mattered. They served their purpose. I don't know what to say. It's a piece of history. And now it's a piece of you, Garrett said, smoothly feeling the familiar surge of power that came with such a grand gesture. He was bestowing a fortune, a legend, upon this girl, binding her to him with its impossible value. He helped her slide it onto her finger. It looked magnificent, a beacon of impossible wealth. "Don't wear it everywhere," he cautioned. "It's a special occasion piece. Every moment with you is a special occasion," she purred, leaning across the table to kiss him, the cold stone of the ring pressing against his cheek. Later that night, as Garrett's driver navigated the quiet, tree-lined streets toward his Central Park West penthouse, he felt a pang of something he couldn't quite name. He checked his reflection in the darkened window of the Maybach. He looked tired. He loosened his tie, the thrill of the evening already dissipating, replaced by a familiar hollowness. When he entered the sprawling apartment, the silence was absolute. The lights were dimmed, casting long shadows across the museum-quality art and minimalist furniture. Aurelia was in the library, bathed in the soft glow of a reading lamp. She was curled in a large armchair, a heavy-looking book in her lap. She looked up as he entered, her expression serene. Aurelia Dubois Montgomery was a woman of quiet, deliberate grace. Her beauty wasn't flashy like Scarlett's. It was timeless, sculpted from generations of wealth and breeding. Her dark hair was pulled back into a simple chignon, and she wore a simple silk robe. At 45, she seemed to exist outside the frantic grasp of time that so terrified Garrett. "You're late," she said. It wasn't an accusation, just a statement of fact. Her voice was low and calm. Board dinner ran long. "You know how it is." The lie slipped out effortlessly, polished by years of practice. He leaned down to kiss her, but she subtly turned her head so his lips met her cheek. It was a small gesture, almost imperceptible, but it was a wall. He'd been feeling those walls go up more and more lately. How was the benefit planning, he asked, moving to the bar to pour himself a scotch. Productive. We finalized the catering with Jean-Georges, she replied, her eyes not leaving her book. Penelope Wright stopped by. Her firm is handling the auction contracts. Penelope was Aurelia's oldest friend and a partner at Sullivan & Cromwell, one of the most powerful law firms in the city. Garrett had always found her unnervingly sharp. Good. He mumbled, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. He looked at his wife, really looked at her for the first time, in what felt like months. He saw the elegant line of her neck, the intelligent set of her eyes. He had married her because she was the right choice, a strategic merger of his new money ambition with her old money prestige. He had never considered her a partner. She was a director on the board of a few museums, a philanthropist. He handled the real world, the world of hostile takeovers and stock options. She handled the world of floral arrangements and seating charts. He felt a sudden, inexplicable urge to confess, to tell her about the ring, about the hollowness, about everything. But the moment passed. It was easier to maintain the fiction. It was safer. "I'm heading to bed," he said, draining his glass. "Big day tomorrow. We're closing the Neuralink acquisition." "Of course," Aurelia said, finally looking up from her book. Her eyes were clear and steady, revealing nothing. "Sleep well, Garrett." He walked out of the library, leaving her in her pool of soft light. He was the king of his world, a master of the universe. He had just handed over a multi-million-dollar treasure to his mistress and lied to his wife's face without flinching. He felt no guilt. He felt nothing at all. And in that vast, empty feeling, he failed to notice the title of the book Aurelia was reading, The Art of War. Aurelia waited until the sound of the master bedroom door clicked shut, a definitive, solid sound that echoed the closing of a chapter. She sat motionless for a full 10 minutes, her senses attuned to the quiet hum of the penthouse. The only sound was the faint traffic noise from the streets below and the rhythmic beating of her own heart. She closed her book, marking her page, and set it deliberately on the side table. The war she was studying was not one of swords and shields, but of leverage and information. She walked not to her own bedroom, but down the long art-lined corridor to Garrett's private study. It was his sanctuary, a space of dark wood, leather, and technology that she rarely entered. The room smelled of his cologne, and a faint, metallic scent of ambition. Her destination was a large, steel-grey safe concealed behind an abstract painting by Gerhard Richter. She knew the combination. It was the date their first and only child, a son, would have been born had he survived the pregnancy 20 years ago. The irony of Garrett using a date of shared tragedy to secure his private treasures was a cruelty so profound it had long ago ceased to sting, hardening instead into a cold, hard stone in her gut. Her fingers, steady and sure, turned the dial. A soft click and the heavy door swung open. Inside were neat stacks of bearer bonds, several high-end watches, in their cases property deeds and a collection of jewelry boxes. Most were from Graf Harry Winston Cartier, but her eyes went directly to the long, dark blue box from Sotheby's. It was exactly where she had seen it 2 weeks ago, when she'd retrieved her mother's pearls. She lifted the lid. The black satin interior was empty. The indentation where the star of Jaipur had rested was a perfect, sapphire-shaped void. It wasn't a shock. It was a confirmation. Aurelia felt no rage, no hot flash of betrayal. What she felt was a chilling, crystalline clarity, the kind that comes after a long fever has broken. For years she had lived in a state of willful ignorance, choosing to interpret the late nights, the sudden business trips, and the emotional distance as the necessary sacrifices for his monumental success. She had played her part, the supportive, unquestioning wife, because it was easier than confronting the truth. But the truth had now presented itself in the form of an empty box. This wasn't his first affair. She was not that naive. But this was different. The others had been fleeting, disposable distractions. This ring, this specific, historically significant, publicly auctioned ring. This was a statement. It was an act of breathtaking arrogance, a slap in the face, delivered with a diamond-encrusted glove. He hadn't just cheated. He had liquidated a piece of their shared assets, a piece of her history to do it. The ring had been purchased through a family trust fund. Her father had established a trust, of which Garrett was the acting manager. It was legally and morally half hers. She closed the safe, spun the dial, and slid the Richter painting back into place, her movements fluid and silent. The next morning she met Penelope Wright at a quiet cafe on the Upper East Side, far from their usual haunts. Penelope, with her razor-sharp bob and eyes that missed nothing, listened intently as Aurelia recounted her discovery, her voice never rising above a calm, measured tone. "The Sotheby's auction," Penelope said, stirring her espresso. "I remember reading about it. The anonymous buyer. So it was him. He used the Dubois family trust to make the purchase Aurelia stated. The quarterly statement came yesterday. A single wire transfer to Sotheby's for $4, $2,000 to $15,000, including the buyer's premium." Penelope's eyebrows shot up. "He used your family trust, Aurelia. That's not just marital infidelity. That's a flagrant breach of fiduciary duty. We can crucify him for that alone." "No," Aurelia said, her gaze firm. "A messy public divorce is what he expects. He'd throw money at it, drag me through the mud, paint me as a bitter, scorned wife. The tabloids like the New York Post would have a field day. He would control the narrative, and in the end, I'd walk away with a handsome settlement, and he'd continue on unblemished." "I am not interested in a settlement, Penny. I'm interested in a reckoning." Penelope leaned back, a slow, admiring smile spreading across her face. She had known Aurelia since they were roommates at Vassar. She knew the brilliant strategic mind that Aurelia had deliberately kept hidden behind a facade of social grace. Aurelia's father, the late Jean-Paul Dubois, had been a titan of industry, a shrewd investor who had taught his daughter far more about balance sheets than flower arrangements. A reckoning, Penelope repeated the word, tasting like victory. "What did you have in mind? Apex Innovations is his identity, his lifeblood, his soul, Aurelia said, her voice dropping lower. He built it, and he believes it is an extension of himself. He's become arrogant, so convinced of his own genius that he's surrounded himself with sycophants. His board is packed with old friends who rubber-stamp his decisions. He's over-leveraged on the Neuralink acquisition. I've seen the financials he foolishly leaves on his desk. He thinks he's untouchable. She paused, taking a sip of her tea. I want to take it away from him. Penelope stared at her, the full, audacious scope of the plan dawning on her. This wasn't about divorce. This was about utter annihilation. Aurelia Apex is a public company, valued at over $20 billion. To take a controlling interest. My personal inheritance from my father, separate from the marital assets, and the trust Garrett controls is substantial. Aurelia interrupted calmly. The portfolio is managed by J.P. Morgan Private Bank. It's valued at just over $2.8 billion. It's been sitting there quietly growing for 20 years. Garrett knows it exists, but he's never known the specifics. He thinks of it as my rainy day fund. Penelope's legal mind was racing, connecting dots, seeing pathways. With that as collateral, we could secure a line of credit of 5, maybe 6 billion. We could set up a series of offshore shell corporations, begin acquiring shares on the open market. Slowly, quietly. He'll see the trading volume, but he'll never trace it back to you. Exactly, Aurelia said. He'll blame a hostile bid from a competitor, maybe Oracle or Salesforce. He'll look for enemies outside the gates, never once thinking to check the citadel itself. This is a declaration of war. Aurelia Penelope warned, her expression serious. Once we start, there is no turning back. It will be brutal. Aurelia looked out the window at the bustling Madison Avenue traffic. For 20 years she had been a silent partner. Her intelligence and insight dismissed her inheritance, treated as a quaint hobby. He had taken her for granted, and now he had taken from her. The era of the quiet, graceful Mrs. Montgomery was over. I know, she said, her voice like ice, and I have never been more ready. The annual conservation gala at the American Museum of Natural History was the glittering apex of the New York philanthropic season. It was Aurelia's territory, an event she had co-chaired for the past decade. Tonight, the vast Millstein Hall of Ocean Life was transformed with tables set up beneath the life-sized model of the blue whale. The air hummed with the sound of discreet gossip, clinking champagne flutes, and the quiet, ferocious networking of the city's elite. Aurelia was a vision in a custom Oscar de la Renta gown of deep sapphire blue, a color she had chosen with deliberate, painful irony. Diamonds dripped from her ears and circled her throat, her own diamonds from her mother's collection. She moved through the room with an effortless grace, a warm smile for a bank CEO here, a shared laugh with a senator's wife there. She was the perfect hostess, the picture of serene elegance. Garrett stood by her side, looking pleased with himself. He loved these events. They were a stage for him, a chance to be seen as not just a ruthless tech mogul, but a benevolent pillar of the community. He was basking in the glow, accepting compliments on Apex's soaring stock price, completely oblivious to the predator standing beside him in designer silk. You've outdone yourself this year, darling, he murmured, squeezing her arm. The place looks incredible. I do my best, she replied, her smile never faltering, though his touch felt like a brand. Her eyes were scanning the room, not for donors, but for one specific guest. She knew Scarlett would be here. Garrett had secured her a ticket through a corporate sponsorship for a small up-and-coming art gallery she nominally worked for. It was a classic move, hiding in plain sight. She spotted her near the bar holding court with a group of younger tech investors. Scarlett was wearing a crimson dress that was cut daringly low, a stark and deliberate contrast to the old money conservatism that filled the room. She was a splash of new, loud color in a muted classic painting. And on the fourth finger of her left hand, catching the light from every angle, was the star of Jaipur. It was not a subtle piece of jewelry. On her hand, it was a declaration, a weapon. Aurelia watched as Scarlett began to move through the crowd, her path a calculated spiraling trajectory that was leading inevitably to them. Garrett saw her too. A flicker of panic crossed his face, quickly masked by a wooden smile. "Aurelia, let's go say hello to the Barclays," he said, trying to steer her away. In a moment, Garrett Aurelia, said, her voice soft but unyielding. She stood her ground, her gaze fixed on the approaching redhead. "I see someone I simply must greet." Scarlett arrived, her smile a mix of feigned innocence and pure triumph. "Garrett, and you must be Aurelia," she gushed, extending her hand. "I'm Scarlett Laurent. I've heard so much about you. It's an honor to finally meet you. This event is just breathtaking." Aurelia took her hand, her grip surprisingly firm. Her eyes met Scarlett's, and then traveled with theatrical slowness down to the magnificent ring. She held Scarlett's hand for a moment, longer than was comfortable, her thumb gently brushing against the massive sapphire. Ms. Laurent Aurelia said, her voice clear and carrying in the small space around them. "What an extraordinary piece of jewelry, a true connoisseur's item." Scarlett preened her plan, working to perfection. "Oh, thank you. It was a gift. From a very, very generous admirer." She glanced at Garrett, a sly, proprietary look in her eyes. Garrett's face was a mask of forced neutrality. He looked like a man standing on a landmine, afraid to move a single muscle. Several people nearby had begun to notice the quiet drama unfolding, their conversations trailing off. Aurelia finally released Scarlett's hand, but her eyes, cold and analytical, remained on the ring. "The Star of Jaipur. If I'm not mistaken," she continued, her tone as pleasant as if she were discussing the weather. "From the Maharaja of Patiala's collection. I followed the auction at Sotheby's with great interest. A fascinating piece. Its history is rather turbulent. It's said to bring great fortune to whoever possesses it, but terrible ruin to whoever steals it. Or I suppose to whoever receives it under false pretenses." The smile on Scarlett's face faltered. The air grew thick with unspoken meaning. Garrett's jaw was clenched so tight, a muscle ticked violently. Aurelia then turned her full attention to the younger woman, her smile becoming something sharp and almost pitying. "It's a magnificent stone. But you must be careful, dear. A ring of that size and significance requires a certain stature to wear. On the wrong hand, it can look less like a gift and more like a transaction, almost vulgar." The word hung in the air, a perfectly delivered stiletto. Scarlett's face, which had been flushed with triumph, turned pale with humiliation. The onlookers quickly averted their eyes, pretending to be engrossed in their canapes. Without another glance at Scarlett, Aurelia turned to her husband. "Garrett, darling, you promised me a dance." She looped her arm through his and gently pulled him toward the dance floor, leaving a stunned Scarlett standing alone, the multi-million-dollar ring on her finger, suddenly feeling as heavy and as cheap as a piece of glass. As they swayed to the music, Garrett's grip on her was painfully tight. What the hell was that? He hissed, his voice a furious whisper. "You were trying to embarrass me." Aurelia leaned her head against his shoulder, her voice a placid murmur against his ear. "Was I was simply making conversation. I thought you'd be proud. You always said you wanted me to take more of an interest in your acquisitions." He pulled back, searching her face for any sign of anger, of tears, of the hysterics he had prepared himself to handle. but he found nothing. Her expression was perfectly, terrifyingly serene. It was like looking into the calm, placid blue of a lake and knowing that just beneath the surface, the depths were icy cold and infinitely deep. He had come tonight, expecting to manage a potentially awkward situation. He realized now, with a dawning sense of dread, he couldn't comprehend that he had not been managing anything. He had just walked blind and smiling straight into the opening salvo of a war he didn't even know had been declared. The Monday after the gala, the silent war began. In a nondescript office in the Cayman Islands, a newly formed entity named Athena Holdings executed its first buy order for 50,000 shares of Apex Innovations. The transaction was a drop in the ocean, completely unnoticed by the market. The next day, another entity, Nemesis Capital, registered in Delaware, bought 75,000 shares. Over the next 3 months, this pattern continued with relentless, ghost-like precision. A network of 12 shell corporations managed by Penelope Wright's most discreet associates and funded by Aurelia's JP Morgan credit line began to systematically absorb Apex stock. They bought in small, irregular blocks at different times of day through various brokers, creating a trading pattern so diffuse and chaotic it was almost impossible to trace back to a single source. It was a masterpiece of financial camouflage. Aurelia, meanwhile, played her part to perfection. She continued her life as Mrs. Montgomery, with a placid, almost beatific calm. She attended her charity board meetings, oversaw the redecoration of their Hamptons estate, and hosted a dinner party for the French ambassador. To Garrett, her behavior after the gala was baffling. He had expected an explosion, a confrontation. Instead, he got nothing. A polite, distant coolness had settled between them, a chasm of unspoken words he was too arrogant and too cowardly to cross. He wrote it off as a prolonged sulk, a feminine Cold War he could wait out. His focus was on his company. Strange things were happening at Apex. The trading volume is up 18% over the 90-day average, but the price is barely moving, said David Chen, Garrett's CFO, pointing at a complex chart on the large screen in Garrett's office. It's death by 1,000 cuts. Someone is accumulating a massive position, but they're being incredibly careful not to spook the market and drive up the price. Garrett stared at the data, a knot of anxiety tightening in his stomach. It's got to be a competitor. Ellison over at Oracle, maybe, or Benioff at Salesforce. They'd love to get their hands on our AI patents. We've had our people at Goldman Sachs run the analysis, David said, adjusting his glasses. They can't find a trail. The buy orders are coming from everywhere and nowhere. It's the most sophisticated stealth accumulation they've ever seen. Whoever this is, they're not just rich. They're brilliant. Garrett slammed his fist on his mahogany desk. Brilliant and gutless. Why not just launch a tender offer? Make a real play for the company instead of skulking in the shadows. He was agitated, paranoid. He started seeing threats everywhere. He snapped at his assistants, questioned the loyalty of his board members, and spent sleepless nights staring at stock tickers. The Neuralink acquisition, which should have been his crowning achievement, had stretched the company's finances thin, making it vulnerable. The debt they had taken on was substantial. A sudden dip in stock price or a hostile takeover bid now would be catastrophic. The pressure was also affecting his relationship with Scarlett. Their clandestine meetings became less about passion and more about his frantic, obsessive monologues about market fluctuations and corporate espionage. "I just don't understand why you're so worried," Scarlett said one afternoon in the sterile, modern hotel suite Garrett kept for their trysts. She was examining her reflection, admiring the star of Jaipur on her finger. "You're Garrett Montgomery. You'll crush them." "It's not that simple, Scarlett," he snapped, pacing the room. "This isn't a street fight. It's a chess game, and my opponent is a ghost." He looked at her, truly looked at her, and for the first time, her youth and lack of sophistication grated on him. She couldn't grasp the scale of the threat he was facing. Her world was a simple one of gifts and admiration. His was a complex, brutal ecosystem of power and capital. They were speaking different languages. The thrill was gone, replaced by a growing irritation. Meanwhile, in her quiet library overlooking Central Park, Aurelia was playing the game with the precision of a grandmaster. Every evening, Penelope would send over an encrypted file containing the day's acquisitions and a market analysis from a team of ex-McKinsey consultants she had hired. Aurelia studied the reports, cross-referencing them with the Apex quarterly earnings reports and shareholder documents Garrett left lying around his study. She learned the rhythms of her husband's company, its strengths, its vulnerabilities. She knew which board members were loyalists and which ones were merely opportunistic. She knew where the financial weak points were, the divisions that were underperforming, the vanity projects that were draining resources. "We're at 4.7%, Penelope reported during one of their secure video calls. "Once we cross the 5% threshold, we'll be legally required to file a 13D with the SEC. That's when the ghost shows its face. "Not yet," Aurelia said. "Garrett holds 22% of the company. The board and loyal executives hold another 15%. The rest is held by institutional investors and the public. He feels secure in his 37% controlling block. He won't see the threat until it's at his throat. We need to move faster. Aurelia, to accelerate, we'd need more capital. A lot more." Aurelia paused, her gaze distant. "My father owned a vineyard in Bordeaux, Château Dubois-la-Fleur. It wasn't part of the trust. He left it to me in a separate will, my personal property. It's valued at a significant amount." Penelope was stunned. "You're going to sell the Chateau Aurelia that's been in your family for over 200 years. Aurelia thought of the generations of Dubois who had walked those vineyards. Then she thought of Garrett, of his casual cruelty of the empty box in the safe. A 200-year-old legacy for a 20-year marriage. It seemed like a fair trade. "Some roots need to be cut to allow for new growth," Aurelia said, her voice devoid of sentiment. "Sell it, Penelope. Liquidate it all. We're going to end this." As the deal to sell the French vineyard was quietly brokered in Paris, Garrett in New York was becoming increasingly unhinged. He called an emergency meeting with his executive team. "I want a poison pill provision drafted immediately," he commanded, his voice raw. "A shareholder rights plan. If any single entity acquires more than 10% of our stock without board approval, it triggers a massive dilution of their shares. We make a takeover prohibitively expensive." David Chen hesitated. "Garrett, the board will be hesitant to approve that. It's a drastic measure," it screams, desperation, to the market. "It will tank our stock price." "I don't care," Garrett roared, his face red. "I will not lose my company to some faceless hedge fund coward. He was building fortifications, laying traps, and preparing for a siege. He was a king in his castle, watching the horizon for an invading army. He never once thought to check the Queen's chambers where the maps were being redrawn, and the entire kingdom was being sold silently and invisibly from right under his feet." The day the 13D filing hit the SEC was a Tuesday. The document was an earthquake. It revealed that a single previously unknown investment vehicle, Athena Holdings, had acquired 8.9% of Apex Innovations. Wall Street was electrified. The ghost finally had a name, but no face. Financial journalists at Bloomberg and the Wall Street Journal scrambled, but the holding company was a black box, its origins obscured by layers of Cayman Islands corporate law. Garrett was apoplectic. "Athena Holdings. Who the hell are they? I want a name. "I want a face," he bellowed into his phone at his legal team. But 2 days later, a second filing dropped. Nemesis Capital revealed a 7.5% stake, then a third, a fourth, and a fifth, all within the span of a week. It was a coordinated multi-front assault. In total, a consortium of seemingly unrelated entities now owned a combined 40% of Apex Innovations. They had bypassed his 10% poison pill trigger by acting as separate entities, a legal grey area so brilliantly exploited that his lawyers were left stammering. The market, finally understanding that this was a serious hostile takeover, went into a frenzy. The stock price surged. The consortium, having already acquired its position at a lower cost, had made a paper fortune in a matter of days. The final move came via a terse, formal letter from Penelope Wright's firm, Sullivan and Cromwell, acting on behalf of the consortium. It called for an emergency meeting of the board of directors to discuss the new controlling shareholder structure and the future strategic direction of the company. Garrett spent the 48 hours leading up to the meeting in a state of furious, sleepless paranoia. He met with his loyal board members, trying to shore up his support. His 37% block, which had once seemed an insurmountable fortress, was now a minority position. The consortium held 41%. The remaining 22% was held by institutional investors and swing voters on the board who were notoriously unsentimental. They would back whichever side promised them the greatest return. Garrett was a fighter. He prepared for the fight of his life. He had his team assemble a presentation showcasing his vision for the company, highlighting record profits and the potential of the Neuralink acquisition. He would appeal to the board's greed and their fear of the unknown. He would paint the consortium as corporate raiders, asset strippers, who would dismantle the company he had built. He would walk into that boardroom and tear them to shreds. The morning of the meeting, he dressed in his most powerful suit, a dark charcoal brioni, and a blood-red tie. As he was about to leave the penthouse, Aurelia emerged from her bedroom. She too was dressed for business. She was wearing a severe, exquisitely tailored black pantsuit. From the row, her hair pulled back in a tight, commanding chignon. A single strand of pearls was her only adornment. She looked less like a philanthropist and more like a CEO. "Where are you going dressed like that?" he asked, distracted. "I have a board meeting," she replied, her voice cool and even. She picked up a slim leather briefcase from the hall table. "The museum." "Something like that," she said. She looked him directly in the eye. "Good luck today, Garrett. I have a feeling you're going to need it." There was something in her tone, a finality, a hint of steel that he was too preoccupied to decipher. He brushed it off and headed downtown. When Garrett strode into the Apex boardroom on the 80th floor, his loyalists were already assembled, their faces grim. The air was thick with tension. He took his place at the head of the long mahogany table, his chair positioned before a panoramic window that offered a godlike view of the city he had conquered. "Let's get this over with," he growled. "Let's see what these pirates have to say for themselves." At precisely 10:00 a.m., the boardroom doors opened. In walked Penelope Wright, her face an unreadable mask of professional calm. And behind her, walking with a steady, unhurried gait that commanded the attention of every person in the room, was Aurelia. A stunned, disbelieving silence fell over the boardroom. The board members exchanged confused glances. Garrett stared, his mouth agape, as his wife took a seat on the opposite side of the table, placing her leather briefcase before her with a soft, definitive click. "Aurelia, what in God's name are you doing here?" Garrett finally sputtered, his voice a mixture of confusion and rage. "This is a closed board meeting. Get out." Aurelia didn't even look at him. Her attention was on the chairman of the board, a man named Robert Meacham. Penelope Wright spoke, her voice cutting through the tension. "Gentlemen, I am Penelope Wright from Sullivan and Cromwell. I am here today as legal counsel for Athena Holdings Nemesis Capital and their associated entities, which, as of this morning, collectively represent a 50% controlling interest in Apex Innovations. She paused, letting the number sink in. 51%. They had acquired another 10% in the last few days of frantic trading. It was a definitive, unassailable majority. These entities, Penelope continued, are all wholly owned subsidiaries of a single private family trust. The sole trustee and beneficiary of that trust is my client. She gestured cleanly toward the woman sitting beside her. Mrs. Aurelia Dubois Montgomery. The color drained from Garrett's face. He looked as if he had been physically struck. He swiveled his chair to face Aurelia, his eyes wide with a horror that was slowly curdling into understanding. The gala, the coldness, her board meeting. It all clicked into place in one sickening moment of revelation. "You," he whispered, the sound barely audible. "You did this?" Aurelia finally met his gaze. Her eyes were not filled with anger or triumph. They were cold, clear, and utterly devoid of emotion. They were the eyes of a stranger. As the representative of the new majority shareholder, Aurelia said, her voice steady and ringing with an authority no one in that room had ever heard from her before. "My first action is to call a vote. A vote on the immediate removal of Garrett Montgomery as chairman and chief executive officer of Apex Innovations for cause citing gross mismanagement and breach of fiduciary duty." She opened her briefcase and slid a thick, bound document across the polished table toward the chairman. "You'll find a detailed account of Mr. Montgomery's use of company funds and marital assets for non-corporate purposes, including the purchase of significant unapproved gifts. A copy of the Sotheby's receipt for the Star of Jaipur is on page 3. Garrett was speechless. He was suffocating. His throne was tilting on its axis. He looked around at the faces of the board members. He saw no loyalty there now. He saw only the cold, hard calculation of men shifting their allegiance to the new center of power. They were looking at Aurelia. Robert Measham cleared his throat, avoiding Garrett's pleading gaze. "A motion has been made by the majority shareholder. Do I have a second?" A hand went up. Then another, and another. Garrett Montgomery, the titan of tech, the master of the universe, sat in his chair, utterly defeated, as he was clinically and efficiently erased from the company that he had once considered his soul. His executioner was the one person in the world he had never not for a single second considered a threat. His wife. The drive back to the penthouse was a silent, suffocating ordeal. Garrett sat in the back of the Maybach, staring blankly at the city rushing past. The world outside the car was the same, but his place in it had been fundamentally and irrevocably altered. He was no longer Garrett Montgomery, CEO of Apex. He was just Garrett Montgomery. The name felt hollow, stripped of its power. Aurelia sat opposite him, her posture perfect. Her gaze directed out her own window. She hadn't said a word since the vote. She hadn't needed to. When the elevator doors opened directly into their apartment, Garrett stormed out, his shock finally erupting into a tidal wave of rage. He whirled on her as she calmly stepped into the foyer. "How could you?" He roared, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "My own wife. You conspired behind my back. You schemed, you plotted to destroy me. For 20 years, Aurelia, 20 years of marriage." Was it all a lie? Aurelia set her briefcase down on a marble console table. She took off her jacket, draping it neatly over a chair. She was in no hurry. She was in complete control. A lie, she repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. She turned to face him, and for the first time, The mask of calm cracked, revealing the raw, wounded fury that had been simmering for years. You want to talk about lies, Garrett? Do you want to talk about the bored dinners that ended at dawn, the business trips to St. Bart's with your executive assistant? Do you want to talk about looking me in the eye and telling me you loved me after you'd just spent the afternoon in a hotel suite with a girl young enough to be your daughter? He was taken aback by her ferocity. This was not the passive, placid Aurelia he knew. That has nothing to do with my company, he shot back, his voice cracking. That was personal. This is business. You've stolen my life's work. Your life's work. She laughed, a bitter, startling sound. You built Apex with seed money from my father's estate. You leveraged my family's name and connections to get your first meetings at Goldman Sachs. You secured the patents for your initial algorithm by acquiring a small firm owned by a friend of my father's. Apex wasn't just your life's work, Garrett. It was built on the foundation of my life, my family, my inheritance. I was a silent, uncredited partner from the very beginning. You just never bothered to notice. Every word was a perfectly aimed blow, dismantling the myth of the self-made man he had so carefully constructed. And then she continued, her voice dropping, becoming laced with a pain so deep it was terrifying. You took money from a trust established by my father, a trust that contained my history, my security, and you used it to buy a trinket, a multi-million-dollar bribe for your mistress. You didn't just betray me as a wife, Garrett. You stole from me as a business partner. And that, she said, taking a step closer, her eyes blazing, was a fatal business mistake. He was deflated, the rage draining out of him, replaced by a desperate, pathetic pleading. Aurelia, please, we can fix this. I'll end it with Scarlett. I'll do anything. Don't do this. Don't take my company. It's not your company anymore. She stated the finality of the words like a death sentence. And you are mistaken about what this is. This is not a negotiation. This is an accounting for 20 years of being underestimated, for 20 years of being a decorative object, for 20 years of being patted on the head and told not to worry my pretty little head about real work. The accounting is now complete. The debt has been paid. She walked past him, heading toward the master suite. My lawyers have already filed for divorce. They will be in touch with yours. I will be staying in the penthouse. You, I believe, still have the key to your hotel suite. I suggest you use it. The fallout for Scarlett Laurent was swift and brutal. The day after the board meeting, her phone lit up with calls from Garrett. She ignored them. She was no fool. She read the news alerts from the Wall Street Journal. Garrett Montgomery ousted from Apex in shocking boardroom coup, led by wife Aurelia Montgomery. She knew instantly that her meal ticket had expired. Garrett was no longer a king. He was a liability. Her brief, glorious flight into the stratosphere of New York society was over. Her only remaining asset was the star of Jaipur. She took it to a private jeweler on 47th Street, a man known for his discretion. She needed to liquidate it fast. She imagined the millions of dollars she would get enough to set her up for life, a handsome severance package for her services. The jeweler examined the ring under a loupe, his face grim. "The stone is magnificent," he said. "But there is a problem." What problem? Scarlett asked, her heart beginning to pound. "I made some calls. It seems Sullivan and Cromwell, on behalf of the Dubois Family Trust, has placed a lien on the stone. They have filed a legal claim stating it is stolen property purchased with misappropriated funds. No reputable dealer in the world will touch it. It's a 12-carat, $4 million paperweight. In fact, possessing it could make you an accessory to a crime." Scarlett stared at him, the blood draining from her face. The ring, her symbol of triumph, was now a trap. Aurelia hadn't just disarmed her, she had turned her own weapon against her. Scarlett was left with nothing but a worthless, beautiful rock and the bitter taste of being a pawn in a game far more complex than she had ever imagined. She had flown close to the sun, and her wings, it turned out, were made of nothing more than glass. The first 100 days of Aurelia Montgomery's tenure as CEO of Apex Innovations were a masterclass in corporate leadership. The business world, which had initially viewed the takeover as a sensational, tabloid-worthy divorce drama, was forced to sit up and take notice. Aurelia was not a vengeful amateur. She was a visionary. She began not with sweeping changes, but with listening. She met with division heads, engineers, marketers, and even the interns. She walked the floors of the company headquarters, asking questions and absorbing information with an intensity that stunned employees who were used to Garrett's top-down authoritarian style. Her first major executive decision was to promote David Chen to Chief Operating Officer. He had been loyal to Garrett, but he was more importantly loyal to the company. Aurelia recognized his talent and his integrity. Her second move was to announce a complete strategic review of the company, led by the prestigious consulting firm McKinsey & Company. She ruthlessly cut Garrett's vanity projects, saving the company hundreds of millions of dollars. She renegotiated the terms of the Neuralink acquisition debt, using her old family connections at JP Morgan to secure a more favorable interest rate. She took the capital saved and reinvested it directly into research and development, the true engine of the tech company, which Garrett had been starving in favor of flashier short-term gains. She rebranded. Apex Innovations under her leadership would not just be about profit, but about purpose. She established the Apex Foundation, seeding it with $100 million of her own money to promote STEM education for young women. It wasn't just good philanthropy, it was brilliant PR and a long-term investment in their future talent pool. The market responded. After an initial period of volatility, Apex stock began to climb steadily and surely. It surpassed its previous highs under Garrett's leadership. Aurelia proved to be a natural on quarterly earnings calls, her calm, data-driven, and no-nonsense approach inspiring confidence in a way Garrett's bluster never could. She didn't charm the analysts. She convinced them with cold, hard facts. 6 months after the takeover, she sat in her office, Garrett's old office on the 80th floor. She had redecorated. The dark, masculine wood and leather were gone, replaced with a light, airy design, modern art and orchids. The room was no longer a monument to a single ego, but a functional, beautiful space for work. She was looking over a proposal for a new partnership with the Kering Group, integrating Apex's AI technology into their luxury retail experience. It was a deal Garrett had tried and failed to land for years. Aurelia had secured a meeting with François-Henri Pinault himself. Her phone buzzed. It was a notification from Google Alerts, a small article in Vanity Fair's online society column. It was a brief mention of Garrett Montgomery, spotted at a bar in Miami looking gaunt and a shadow of his former self. The divorce had been finalized, leaving him with a fraction of the fortune he once commanded. He was a man untethered from the source of his power and identity, adrift in a world that no longer revered him. Aurelia read the sentence and felt a surprising lack of emotion. There was no joy, no schadenfreude, no lingering anger. There was only a quiet sense of closure, the feeling of closing a long, difficult book and placing it back on the shelf. His story was over. Hers was just beginning. She put the phone down and turned back to the window. The panoramic view of the city, once Garrett's symbol of conquest, was now hers. but she saw it differently. He had seen a kingdom to be ruled. She saw a network of possibilities, a landscape of connections, a future to be built. The power she held was not the power of possession, but the power of creation. She had not stolen his company. She had liberated it. And in doing so, she had finally completely liberated herself. Aurelia Montgomery's story is a chilling reminder that the most dangerous opponent is the one you never see as a competitor. It's a tale not just of revenge, but of reclamation of a woman taking back the power, the credit and the future that was quietly stolen from her over 2 decades. She didn't just break out of her gilded cage. She dismantled it, sold it for parts, and used the profits to build an empire. It forces us to ask what happens when quiet strength decides to stop being quiet. And in a world of high-stakes business and personal betrayal, what would you have done? Would you have walked away with a settlement? Or would you have demanded the entire company as payment if this story of justice and spectacular revenge captivated you? Make sure to hit that like button, share it with someone who loves a story where the underdog comes out on top, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel. We have many more tales of intrigue, karma, and incredible real-life drama coming your way. He was a man who had everything: a corner office on the 50th floor, a tailored suit worth more than most cars, and a ruthless ambition that had scorched everyone beneath him. His secretary Clara was just another rung on his ladder, diligent, intelligent, and inconveniently pregnant. When his ambitious mistress, Serafina, wanted Clara gone, he did it without a second thought. He fired her, publicly, humiliatingly. What he didn't know, as he watched her walk away, was that Clara wasn't just his secretary. She was Clara Hayes, the only daughter of the man who owned the entire building, and the reckoning was just beginning. Julian Vance lived his life 50 floors above New York City, and he believed this altitude granted him a kind of divinity. His office at Vanguard Equity Partners wasn't just a room, it was a testament to his arrival. It was a cube of glass, suspended over the city, and from it he viewed the world, and his employees, as tiny, manageable subjects. Julian was a man carved from ambition. At 38, he was the youngest senior vice president in the firm's history, and he wore his success like armor. Bespoke Tom Ford suits, a Patek Philippe watch that chimed on the quarter hour, and a smile that was both dazzling and predatory. Outside that glass cube sat Clara Hayes. Clara was, in every way, the antithesis of Julian's flash. She was quiet, methodical, and possessed an intelligence that was as deep as it was unobtrusive. For 2 years, she had been the perfect secretary. She anticipated his needs, corrected his mistakes before he made them, and managed his chaotic schedule with an unnerving calm. She was, as Julian often bragged to his peers, a mind reader. But 6 months ago, Clara had become an inconvenience. She was pregnant. Her body, once neatly professional, was now undeniably round. Her presence, once efficient, now seemed to Julian to be a constant, ticking reminder of biological messiness. He loathed it. It wasn't just the impending maternity leave. A scheduling black hole, he'd called it. It was the visual of it. It screamed weakness. It screamed domesticity. It screamed everything Julian had sacrificed to get where he was. "Clara!" he barked through the intercom, not looking up from his terminal. "My 10 a.m. client notes. Now." "They're on your desk, Julian," her calm voice replied instantly. "I placed them there an hour ago. Open to page 3, where you'll find the discrepancies in their Q3 report." Julian glanced down. There they were. He grunted, annoyed at her preemptive competence. His annoyance was being actively stoked by Serafina Croft. Serafina was the firm's new head of strategic marketing, hired 3 months prior. She was fire to Clara's ice, all sharp angles, blood-red lipstick, and a laugh that echoed with undisguised avarice. She and Julian had fallen into a discreet, then flagrant affair almost immediately. Serafina didn't just want Julian's affection, she wanted his power, and she saw Clara as a stubborn obstacle. Serafina sauntered over to Clara's desk, leaning against it hip first, deliberately crowding Clara's space. She was holding a steaming mug. "Still here, Clara?" Serafina purred, loud enough for the entire floor to hear. "I'm surprised you can still fit behind that desk. You're blooming." Clara didn't look up from her screen. "I'm fine, Miss Croft. Can I help you with something?" "Oh, just admiring your dedication," Serafina said, taking a sip. "Julian is so kind to let you keep working. Most women in your condition would be at home, nesting or something." A few junior analysts snickered. Clara's fingers paused on the keyboard. Beside her, Mary, the older executive assistant for another partner, shot Serafina a venomous look. Mary liked Clara. She'd seen ambitious sharks like Serafina devour good people for sport. "I'm more effective here, Miss Croft," Clara said evenly. "Are you, though?" Serafina shot back. Julian was just complaining that the Sanderson files were late. "Pregnancy brain, I suppose?" Clara's head snapped up. "The Sanderson files are not due until tomorrow at 5. Julian wanted them today. He must have forgotten to tell you," Serafina said, with a fake pout. "Don't worry, I handled it for him." Clara watched her walk away, a perfectly straight seam running up the back of her designer skirt. Clara looked at her digital scheduler. The Sanderson deadline was, indeed, tomorrow. Serafina was lying. She was building a narrative. This wasn't the first time. For weeks, Serafina had been helpfully pointing out Clara's lapses. A meeting missed that had been rescheduled by Serafina herself. A coffee order that was wrong, though Julian had changed his preference that morning. Small, insidious cuts designed to bleed Clara's reputation dry. And Julian, blinded by Serafina's ambition and his own, was letting it happen. Later that day, Julian had a crisis. A major client, the pension fund for the state of Ohio, was threatening to pull their $800 million portfolio. Their representative was on a conference call, and he was furious. "I'm looking at this proposal, Vance, and it's a joke," the man yelled through the speakerphone. "You've miscalculated our exposure by nearly 15%. This is amateur hour." Julian was sweating. He was shuffling papers, his charm failing. "Mr. Henderson, if you'll just let me explain." Clara, listening from her desk, quietly printed a single sheet of paper. She walked into the glass office, ignoring Serafina, who had perched herself on the guest chair, and slid the paper in front of Julian. On it were 3 bullet points. Julian paused. He read them. His posture changed. "Mr. Henderson," Julian said, his voice suddenly smooth as silk. "I haven't miscalculated. You're looking at the projections before we factored in the new federal bond acquisitions. If you'll turn to Appendix D, subsection 4A, which my team prepared this morning, you'll see we've actually shielded your exposure. The 15% discrepancy isn't a loss. It's a hedge that's already paying dividends." There was a silence on the line. "Well, why didn't you say so?" "I prefer to let the numbers speak for themselves," Julian said, leaning back. He won the call. The client was pacified. When he hung up, Serafina ran a hand up his arm. "You were brilliant, Julian. You saved us." Julian straightened his tie, his gaze falling on Clara, who was quietly retrieving the paper. "Clara, get the Henderson contingency file updated, and next time, try to keep up." Clara paused at the door, her back to him. Of course, Julian. She walked out. Julian didn't see the look on her face, but Mary at the next desk did. It wasn't defeat, it wasn't sadness, it was a cold, calculating patience. It was the look of a chess master watching her opponent knowingly walk into a trap. The trap was being set, but not by Clara. It was being set by Julian and Serafina over $300 stakes at the Onyx Room, a restaurant so dark and exclusive it felt like a vault. "She has to go, Julian," Serafina said, swirling a glass of Cabernet. The crimson liquid caught the light from the single candle. "She makes you look soft." Julian loosened his tie, away from the fluorescent lights of the office. His ambition felt purer, more justified. "She's pregnant, Sarah. Firing her is a legal nightmare. The optics are terrible." "Optics?" Serafina laughed, a low, throaty sound. "We're not talking about optics. We're talking about your future, the partnership, the Asia-Pacific expansion. Do you think David Morrison got to be CEO by worrying about optics? He got there by being decisive, by cutting liabilities." She leaned in, her voice dropping. "And she is a liability. She's slow, she's dowdy, and she's watching us. I don't like it." Julian frowned. "She's a secretary. She's not watching anything." "Isn't she?" Serafina countered. "She saved you on that Henderson call. How did she know that? How was she that prepared? It's like she's auditing you. It's creepy, Julian. And frankly, I want her desk. I want to be right outside your office. I can be your partner in this, Julian. Your real partner. But not while she's there, playing Mother Superior." The image she painted was potent. Serafina, in her sharp suits, sitting guard at his door. Serafina, anticipating his real needs. It was an intoxicating thought. The pregnancy had repulsed him, but Serafina was right. Clara's quiet competence was, in its own way, a threat. It felt like judgment. "Fine," Julian said, his voice hardening. "We cut the liability, but it has to be clean. It has to be for cause." "Then we find a cause?" Serafina smiled, raising her glass. The cause began the next day. It was a two-pronged attack: manufacture a performance issue and sabotage her reliability. The first step was a file. The North Star acquisition was Julian's flagship project, a $2 billion deal. The final signatory papers were due by courier to London by 10 a.m. Friday. This was a hard deadline. Missing it would incur massive penalties. Clara had the package prepped by Wednesday. She logged it for international courier pickup, triple-checked the customs forms, and placed the bright red, wax-sealed envelope in the secure outgoing mail slot. She sent a confirmation email to Julian. "North Star package is secure and logged for 8 a.m. pickup tomorrow, Thursday. It will arrive in London with 24 hours to spare." Julian read the email. Serafina was leaning over his shoulder. "See?" he whispered. "She's on top of it." "It's impossible." "Nothing is impossible," Serafina whispered back. She waited until 5:30 p.m., when Clara, moving a little slower than usual, packed her bag and headed for the elevator. Clara was the last to leave their section. Mary, the other assistant, had left hours ago. At 5:35 p.m., Serafina walked calmly to the mailroom. She flirted with the night shift clerk, asked him to find a lost earring near the sorting table. While he was distracted, her hand darted into the international secure slot. She retrieved the bright red envelope. She didn't destroy it. She simply slipped it into her oversized designer handbag. At 7 p.m., she and Julian were in his office. He was pacing. "This is insane, Sarah. This is a felony." "It's a clerical error, Julian," she cooed, placing the envelope on his desk. "Clara's error. She must have forgotten to put it in the slot. Look, here it is, sitting on her desk, buried under a memo. She must have left it this afternoon. How tragic. How forgetful. She then moved to Clara's computer. Clara, trusting, had her password saved in a desktop file for Julian, in case of emergency. This, Serafina decided, was an emergency. She logged into Clara's email. She found the confirmation message sent to Julian. North Star package is secure and logged. Serafina smiled, and with a click of the mouse, she deleted it. Not just from Clara's sent folder, but from the server-side recall. Then, she went into Clara's scheduler and deleted the courier pickup appointment. "There," she said, logging out. "No email, no appointment, just a package sitting on her desk. Missed. A multi-billion-dollar deal, jeopardized by her incompetence. By her pregnancy brain." Julian stared at the package. This was the point of no return. This wasn't just firing someone, it was destroying them. He picked up the package. He opened Clara's desk drawer, the one with her spare sweaters and prenatal vitamins, and dropped the package inside, kicking it to the very back. "It's done," he said, his voice hollow. "Good," Serafina said, kissing him hard. "Now tomorrow, we'll be in the Chicago office. We'll be unreachable. By the time anyone realizes the package never left, it will be Friday morning. It will be too late, and it will be entirely her fault." They left the office, partners in crime. Back in the darkness, the green light on Clara's computer terminal blinked off, but across the hall, a small red light on a ceiling-mounted security camera, the one Julian always assumed was just for show, remained on. It had captured Serafina's 5:35 p.m. visit to the mailroom. It had captured her logging into Clara's computer. It had captured everything. Friday morning was electric with panic. The first call came at 9 a.m., London time, which was 4 a.m. in New York. Julian, asleep in his high-rise apartment, ignored it. The second came at 5 a.m. from his boss, David Morrison. Julian answered that one. "Vance, where in God's name is the North Star package?" Morrison bellowed, his voice cracking with transatlantic static. "Our London team is sitting here with the board, and the documents are not here. The 10 a.m. deadline is in 1 hour. Julian feigned groggy confusion. "What? That's impossible." Clara confirmed it was sent. "Well, it wasn't," Morrison roared. "You fix this, Vance. You fix this now, or your partnership is dead." The line clicked. Julian was wide awake. He frantically called the office. Clara, who always arrived at 7 a.m., picked up. "Clara, where is the North Star package?" Julian yelled, genuine panic now mixing with his manufactured rage. "It's... what?" Clara's voice was instantly alert. "Julian, it's in London. I sent it Wednesday for Thursday pickup." "It's not in London. The courier company has no record of a pickup. Did you log it?" "Yes, of course I logged it. I emailed you the confirmation." Clara was typing furiously. "Julian, the email. It's gone. The scheduler appointment. It's not here." "What do you mean it's not there?" Julian spat. "Did you forget? Clara, did you forget to send the most important package of my career?" "No, Clara was stunned. She was searching her desk, her mind racing. I don't understand. I know Find it, Clara. Find it, or you are finished." Julian hung up. He showered, shaved, and dressed with methodical care. He put on his most expensive suit. Today was a day for an execution. He arrived at the office at 9 a.m. sharp. The floor was a morgue. Everyone knew. The North Star deal was dead. The firm would face millions in penalties, but worse, the reputational damage was catastrophic. Clara was pale, standing by her desk, her hands resting on her stomach. She looked defeated. "My office, Clara." "Now," Julian said, his voice devoid of all warmth. Serafina was already inside, sitting in the guest chair, examining her nails. She looked up as Clara entered, a mask of false sympathy on her face. Clara, I'm so sorry. This is just a tragedy. Julian, I don't know what happened, Clara began, her voice shaking but firm. I took that package to the mailroom myself. I logged it. I emailed you. Someone. Julian cut her off, his voice dangerously low. Or something? Like pregnancy brain, Clara? Is that the something? Clara recoiled as if struck. How dare you? I dare, Julian said, stepping closer. Because I trusted you. I looked like a fool this morning. This firm is now exposed to litigation and ruin, all because my mind-reader secretary was too busy picking out nursery colours to do her one simple job. That is not true, Clara said, her voice rising. I have never missed a deadline. I have never failed you. This is a mistake. This is wrong. It's a failure, Clara. A catastrophic failure, Julian said. He leaned on his desk, the picture of a disappointed, betrayed leader. Serafina was the one who found the package. Go on, Sarah, tell her. Serafina looked up, her eyes wide with mock sadness. Clara, I found it this morning, in your desk drawer, under a pile of baby magazines. This was a lie too far, a vicious, unnecessary embellishment. What? Clara whispered. She physically staggered back. No, I would never. Someone put it there. Who, Clara? Julian laughed, a cold, barking sound. The mailroom gnome? Serafina? Me? Do you hear how paranoid you sound? You're hormonal, you're forgetful, and you just cost this company its biggest deal of the decade. He circled his desk and stood over her. She had to tilt her head back to look at him. I can't have unreliable people on my team, he said. The partnership is expanding. We're moving into Asia. I need sharks. Clara, not this. He gestured vaguely at her stomach. Clara's eyes, which had been wide with shock, suddenly narrowed. The fear vanished, replaced by that same cold, calculating calm Mary had seen before. Julian, she said, her voice quiet. You are making a terrible mistake. No, he said. My mistake was not doing this months ago. You're fired, Clara, effective immediately. Julian, you can't, Serafina said, playing her part. I can and I am, Julian snapped. Performance. Gross negligence. I have more than cause. Security is on their way up. The entire office was watching through the glass walls. They could hear the raised voices. Mary had her hand over her mouth. You're firing me, Clara stated, not a question. Because of a package you know I sent. You're firing me, 6 months pregnant, to give my desk to your mistress. The air left the room. Julian's face went from angry to purple. Serafina shot to her feet. How dare you? Serafina shrieked. Shut up, Serafina, Clara said, her voice cutting through the air like a razor. She never broke eye contact with Julian. You will regret this, Julian Vance. You will regret this more than any other decision in your short, pathetic life. Get her out, Julian choked out, pressing the security button on his phone. 2 uniformed guards arrived. Mr. Vance? Ms. Hayes is no longer an employee. Please escort her from the building. The guards looked uncomfortable. Escorting a visibly pregnant woman out was a new low. Ma'am, if you'll come with us. Clara didn't look at them. She looked only at Julian. She let the silence stretch, imprinting his furious, triumphant face into her memory. Then she turned, with all the dignity she could muster, and walked out of the glass office. The guards followed. Someone had already brought a cardboard box to her desk. She didn't have much. A framed photo, a coffee mug, a small plant. Mary rushed over, tears in her eyes. Clara, I'm so sorry. I know you didn't. "It's all right, Mary," Clara said, her voice soft now. "It's not your fault." She placed her few items in the box. As she did, her sleeve rode up, revealing a simple, elegant watch. It wasn't a Rolex or a Patek. It was a vintage Cartier, understated, but worth more than Julian's entire collection. No one noticed. She picked up the box. The entire floor was silent, watching her walk of shame to the elevators. Serafina was standing in the doorway of Julian's office, a triumphant smirk on her face. Clara passed her and paused. "You know," Clara whispered, just for Serafina. "The camera in the 50th floor hallway. It has a surprisingly clear view of the mailroom. You should really fix your hair before you commit a felony next time." Serafina's face turned to chalk. Clara smiled just once and walked to the elevator. The doors opened. She stepped inside, box in hand, and as the door slid shut, she allowed herself one single shaky breath. Then she pulled out her phone. She didn't call a lawyer. She didn't call her husband. She hit a number on her speed dial. "Dad," she said, as the elevator began its descent. "It's done. He did it. He fired me." A deep, kind voice rumbled on the other end. "Are you all right, sweetheart?" "I'm fine, Dad. But Vanguard Equity is not. The rot is worse than we thought." "I'll be there in an hour," the voice said. "It's time I came out of retirement." Clara didn't live in a cramped one-bedroom apartment. She lived in a sprawling, 5-story brownstone on the Upper East Side, a fortress of old money and quiet elegance. The doorman, a kind man named Patrick, who had known her since she was a girl, rushed to take her box. "Miss Hayes," he said, his face creased with worry. "You're home early. Is everything all right?" "Everything is precisely as it should be, Patrick," Clara said, managing a smile. "Is my father here?" "Mr. Hayes is in the library, Mum. He's been waiting for you." She walked past the soaring ceilings and the original Rothko paintings in the foyer, her heels clicking on the marble. She entered the library, a room panelled in dark mahogany and smelling of old books and leather. Harrison Hayes stood by the window, looking out over the private garden. He was a man in his late 60s, but he radiated an energy that shamed men half his age. He wasn't tall, but he was broad, with a full head of white hair and eyes so blue they seemed to bore through steel. This was the man who had built Vanguard Equity Partners from nothing, a legendary, almost mythical figure on Wall Street. The press called him the Architect. For the last 5 years he had been happily retired, leaving the day-to-day to his hand-picked successor, David Morrison. He turned as she entered. "Clara." He enveloped her in a hug, his hand going to her belly. "And how is my grandchild?" "He's kicking," Clara smiled, leaning into him. "He's as indignant as I am." "He has my blood, after all," Harrison chuckled. He led her to a deep leather armchair and poured her a glass of water. "Tell me everything. From the top." Clara recounted the entire sordid affair. The Henderson call, the missed package, the lies, Serafina, the public humiliation. Harrison listened, his face impassive. He was a man who listened for a living, and his stillness was more terrifying than any rage. "He used the phrase, 'pregnancy brain'?" Harrison asked, his voice soft. "He did, and then he gestured to my stomach and said, 'I need sharks, not this.'" Harrison closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, the blue had turned to ice. "Julian Vance, I remember him. Wharton, same as you. Top of his class. I thought he was hungry. I didn't realize he was depraved." This had all been Clara's idea. A year ago, she had been a rising star at a rival firm, already a junior partner. But she'd been hearing things about her father's company. Rumors, whispers of a toxic Shark Tank culture that had taken root since his retirement. Talk of bullying, of shady accounting, of good people being pushed out. "It's my legacy, Dad," she had told him. "It's our name on the building. I won't let it be rotted from the inside." She'd had one condition. She would go in with her mother's maiden name, Hayes. No one would know who she was. She'd start as a floater, learn the systems, and find the source of the rot. Her father had argued, but she was as stubborn as he was. Her credentials were so good, she was placed as Julian Vance's secretary within a month. His reputation as a difficult manager was legendary, and no one else would take the job. "I thought he was just an arrogant bully, Dad," Clara said, sipping her water. "But this is criminal. Serafina Croft and he, they're stealing." "Stealing?" Harrison sat up. "You have proof?" "More than proof," Clara said. She walked to the desk and pulled out a slim, encrypted flash drive. "Julian thought I was reading baby magazines. I was running forensic accounting on his discretionary marketing funds, the ones he directs to Serafina." She plugged the drive into a laptop. "Serafina isn't just his mistress. She's his launderer. 3 months ago, she incorporated a shell company, Croft Media Solutions. Since then, Julian has approved over $4 million in consulting fees to this company. The invoices are for market synergy analysis and brand strategy. They're boilerplate nonsense." She pulled up another file. "Here are the bank transfers from Croft Media Solutions to an offshore account in the Caymans, an account held by a holding company. And guess who the sole director of that holding company is?" "Julian Vance," Harrison finished, his voice grim. "He wasn't firing me because I'm pregnant," Clara said, the pieces clicking into place. "He was firing me because I was there. I was the one who processed his expense reports. I was the one who saw the invoices. He and Serafina, they thought I was just a dumb, pregnant secretary. They got sloppy. They were afraid I was getting too close." "The North Star package," Harrison said. "It wasn't just to get you fired. It was a distraction, a big, messy, public execution to draw everyone's attention away from the real crime." "Exactly. And they used my pregnancy as the perfect, believable excuse for my incompetence." Harrison stood and walked back to the window. The silence in the room was heavy. "David Morrison," Harrison finally said. "He's a good man, but he's blind. He wants to see the best in people. He let this happen." "What do we do now?" Clara asked. Harrison turned. The kindness was gone from his face, replaced by the cool, lethal focus of the architect. "Now? Now we remind them whose name is on the building." He picked up his phone. "Robert, get the jet ready. We're going to the office. And call an emergency meeting of the entire board of directors. Tell them Harrison Hayes is back." He looked at his daughter, a fierce pride in his eyes. "And Clara, it's time for you to change out of your secretary's uniform. You're going to need your Wharton suit for this." Julian Vance felt like a king. He had slept the sleep of the victorious. The North Star deal was a disaster, yes, but he had already spun it. He had spent all of Friday afternoon in crisis meetings with David Morrison, the CEO. "David, I am shattered," Julian had said, a masterpiece of feigned grief. "I trusted her. I think I was too sensitive to her condition. I didn't want to add to her stress, so I wasn't as vigilant. I blame myself." Morrison, a man who valued empathy, had bought it. "It's a terrible lapse, Julian, but you're right. The timing, it's a mess. Don't worry. Our lawyers will handle the fallout. You just focus on the partnership. We need your leadership." The partnership. It was still his. He had cut the liability, and he was being rewarded for it. Now it was Monday morning. He walked into the lobby of the Vanguard Tower, his $3,000 leather shoes clicking on the granite. He nodded curtly to the security guard, his mind on Serafina, who was already upstairs. She had officially moved her things to Clara's old desk, right outside his glass cube. Everything was in its right place. The elevator was packed with junior analysts, all of whom went silent when he stepped in. He was a god to them. Terrifying, but a god. When he stepped out onto the 50th floor, however, the atmosphere was wrong. It wasn't the usual Monday morning hustle. It was silent, tense. Mary, the older assistant, was at her desk, her eyes red. When she saw Julian, she gave him a look of such pure, unadulterated contempt that it actually made him pause. "Good morning, Mary," he said. Mary just turned back to her screen. He shrugged it off. He walked toward his office. Serafina was not at her new desk. Strange. Then he saw it. An email flagged "Urgent Mandatory" had arrived at 8:01 a.m. Subject: Emergency Board and Senior Partner Meeting, 9 a.m. Location: the Founders Boardroom, 52nd floor. Attendance: mandatory, no exceptions. Julian's heart gave a little thrill. This was it. The North Star fallout was over, and this was his promotion. They were gathering the partners to announce him. They were probably fast-tracking it to show the firm was stable, moving forward. He checked his reflection in the glass, straightened his Brioni tie. He was ready. He took the private executive elevator to the 52nd floor. This floor was for board meetings only. It was quiet, opulent, and smelled of old money and furniture polish. He pushed open the massive oak double doors to the founder's boardroom and stopped dead. The room was full. The entire executive board, all 12 members, were seated. David Morrison, the CEO, was there, looking pale and nervous, not at the head of the table but on the side. At the head of the table, in the high-backed chair that had sat empty for 5 years, was Harrison Hayes. Julian's blood turned to ice water. He had never met Harrison Hayes. He had only seen the oil portrait of him in the lobby. The man in the portrait was smiling. The man at the table was not. "Mr. Vance," Harrison said, his voice quiet but echoing in the cavernous room. "You're late. Take a seat." Julian's legs felt like lead. He fumbled into the only empty chair. It was at the far end of the table, opposite Harrison. He felt like he was being judged from a mile away. "Where is Serafina Croft?" Julian managed to ask. "Ms. Croft is indisposed," Harrison said. "She's with our head of security and our internal audit team. It seems there are some irregularities in her marketing budget. But we'll get to that." Julian's mouth went dry. This was not a promotion. "I have been retired for 5 years," Harrison began, his eyes sweeping the table, landing on every single board member. "I left this firm, Vanguard, in your hands. I trusted you to maintain the culture I built, a culture of integrity, of diligence, and of respect." He steepled his fingers, his icy blue gaze finally landing and staying on Julian. "Instead, I find a culture of bullying, of theft, and of staggering incompetence. Mr. Morrison, you were CEO. How did this happen?" David Morrison looked like he was going to be sick. "Harrison, I had no idea. The internal reports," Harrison cut him off, "were doctored. The profits from Mr. Vance's division, for example, have been exaggerated. His successes, it seems, were not his own." Julian gripped the arms of his chair. "Mr. Hayes, I don't know what you've been told, but my division is the most profitable in the firm. The Henderson call just last week." "Ah, yes. The Henderson call," Harrison said, a thin smile playing on his lips. "The one you brilliantly saved. A call where you miscalculated a client's exposure by 15%, and your secretary had to slide you the answer. Julian was speechless. How? How do you— I know, Harrison said, because my head of internal review told me. You see, I've had someone on the inside for the last 8 months. Someone I trust implicitly. Someone with a Wharton MBA, a background in forensic accounting, and a vested interest in this company's good name. Harrison nodded to the double doors. You can come in now. The doors opened. In walked Clara Hayes. She was not the Clara he knew. The mousy brown hair was pulled back into a severe, elegant chignon. The drab maternity blouses were gone, replaced by a dark navy blue Armani pantsuit, custom-tailored to accommodate her pregnancy. She wore her power as comfortably as he wore his arrogance. She looked, Julian realized with a jolt of pure terror, exactly like the man at the other end of the table. She was not carrying a box. She was carrying a leather-bound portfolio. Clara, Julian breathed, his voice a dry rasp. The rest of the board was staring, their minds scrambling to connect the dots. That's Ms. Hayes Donovan to you, Mr. Vance, Clara said, her voice clear and cold. She took a seat at the table, to the right of her father. Clara Hayes Donovan, daughter of Harrison Hayes, and as of 8 a.m. this morning, the new Chief Operating Officer of Vanguard Equity Partners. David Morrison lunged forward. Harrison, this is my daughter. David, Harrison snapped. And she is the only person in this room who has done her job. Please, Clara, proceed. Clara opened her portfolio. Good morning, gentlemen. For the last 8 months, I have been working as an executive assistant to Mr. Vance. My father and I were concerned about the cultural rot that was eroding this firm's foundation. We were right to be. She looked directly at Julian. Her eyes were not angry. They were worse. They were diagnostic. Mr. Vance, she began, on Friday, you fired me for gross negligence, specifically for failing to courier the North Star acquisition documents. You didn't send them, Julian stammered, falling back on his lie. You left them in your desk. Serafina found them. No, Clara said flatly. I did not. On Wednesday, at 4:51 p.m., I personally logged the package and placed it in the mailroom's secure bin. At 5:37 p.m., she nodded to a man in the corner who dimmed the lights and turned on the large projector screen. Ms. Serafina Croft entered the mailroom. The screen lit up with grainy, time-stamped security footage. Serafina clear as day, distracting the clerk and stealing the red envelope. A collective gasp went around the room. At 7:14 p.m., Clara continued, as the footage changed. Ms. Croft and Mr. Vance are seen entering his office. At 7:19 p.m., Ms. Croft is seen logging into my terminal, using my credentials. She proceeds to delete my confirmation email and the courier appointment. The video was silent, but the implications were deafening. Julian was white. And at 7:21 p.m., Clara said, her voice dropping, Mr. Vance is seen taking the North Star package and placing it inside my desk drawer. The video showed him do it. The board turned as one to stare at him. You, Julian sputtered. You set me up. No, Julian, Clara said. You set yourself up. I was just the secretary. I was just the hormonal, forgetful, pregnant woman. You never, ever thought I'd be a threat. You never thought I mattered. You were so blinded by your own arrogance and your affair that you committed mail fraud and conspiracy right in front of a security camera. But why? David Morrison asked, his face ashen. Why would you, Julian? Sabotage a $2 billion deal, just to fire a secretary? That, Harrison Hayes said, is the billion-dollar question. Clara, Clara looked back at Julian. The look of a cold, satisfied predator was gone from his face. Now it was just the pathetic, sweaty fear of a man trapped. "He didn't fire me because he thought I was incompetent," Clara said to the board. "He fired me because he was terrified I was competent." She clicked to the next slide. It was a complex flowchart of bank accounts. Julian Vance and Seraphina Croft were not just having an affair, Clara announced. They were embezzling. For the last 3 months, Mr. Vance has been approving ghost invoices from a shell marketing company. That company, Croft Media Solutions, was founded by and is solely owned by Ms. Croft. In 90 days, they have siphoned $4.2 million from this firm. She pointed to a line item. This $4.2 million was then wired to a holding company in the Cayman Islands, a holding company named J. Vance Capital. Ring any bells, Julian? Julian Vance made a sound, a low, strangled noise. "I processed those invoices," Clara said. "I saw the signatures. You got sloppy, Julian. You thought I was too stupid or too distracted by my condition to notice that you were approving multi-million-dollar invoices on a Friday afternoon without a single line of due diligence. You fired me to stop me from talking. You fabricated the North Star crisis to make my firing so spectacular, so public, that no one would ever believe a word I said. I would just be the crazy, pregnant secretary who cost us all." She stood up, slowly, and walked around the table until she was standing directly behind him. He was frozen, staring at the screen that showed his financial ruin. "You didn't fire me for your mistress, Julian," she whispered, so only he and the man next to him could hear. "You fired me for your greed. You just used my pregnancy as your excuse. You gestured to my child, my son, and called him a liability. You called me this." She moved back to her seat. "Mr. Vance, you are a thief. You are a conspirator. And worst of all, you are a fool." The heavy oak doors of the founder's boardroom shut with a final, damning click. The silence that fell was heavier than the wood. Harrison Hayes's words, "report," still hung in the air, a guillotine that had just dropped. Julian Vance, a man who had lived his entire life on a diet of adrenaline and other people's fear, was now a statue of pure, waxy terror. The two detectives, businesslike and unimpressed by the bespoke suit and the 52nd floor view, moved to his chair. "Mr. Vance, you are under arrest for conspiracy, wire fraud, and embezzlement," the taller detective said, his voice a monotone that cut through Julian's paralysis. "Please stand and place your hands behind your back." Julian finally broke. It wasn't a snap. It was a crumble. "No," he whimpered, a sound so pathetic it made the board members physically recoil. "No, wait, you don't understand. It was her. It was Seraphina. She seduced me. She set this all up. She planted the files. It was her idea." Clara, who had remained standing, let out a sound of pure, unadulterated disgust. "Pathetic," she said, her voice clear and carrying. "Even now, even with the cuffs literally on their way to your wrists, you cannot take responsibility for a single one of your actions. You blame the woman you were sleeping with. You blame the woman you fired. You are a black hole of a man, Julian. Nothing is ever your fault." As the cold steel clicked shut around his wrists, Julian's terror-fueled denial finally cracked, revealing the raw, venomous hatred beneath. He surged to his feet, a snarling, cornered animal. "You!" he spat at Clara, his face purple. "A secretary. You set me up. This was all you." "I did my job, Julian," Clara said, her voice impossibly calm. "The one I was hired for, the one you paid me for. You just never bothered to ask what it was. You thought I was there to fetch your coffee. I was there to protect my family's name." Marcus Thorne, a senior partner and Julian's primary ally on the board, finally found his voice. "Harrison, this is madness," he sputtered, standing up. "Arresting a senior VP in the boardroom? The PR fallout. This is precipitous. We need to handle this internally." Harrison Hayes didn't even turn his head. "Sit down, Marcus," he said, his voice dangerously low. "You're embarrassed because you backed the wrong horse. You're part of the internal problem I'm handling." He nodded to the detectives. "Get him out of my sight." The detectives began to pull Julian toward the door. As he passed Clara, he lunged, his cuffed hand straining. "You'll run this company into the ground, you sentimental bitch. This place needs sharks, and you're just weak." Clara didn't flinch. She stood her ground, forcing the detectives to yank him back. She looked him dead in the eye, her gaze a surgeon's scalpel. "My sentiment, Julian, is the one variable your arrogant mind never accounted for. My sentiment is for the 4,000 employees whose futures you gambled with. My sentiment is for the name my father built. You only accounted for your wallet. Enjoy your new accommodations. I hear the views are terrible." His shriek of rage was cut off as the doors closed behind him. The room exhaled. Harrison Hayes let the silence stretch for a beat before he spoke. "As for Ms. Croft," he said, "she is in a conference room on the 40th floor with our audit team and her own lawyer. Faced with the video evidence, she has already provided a full confession, attempting, like Mr. Vance, to pin the entire scheme on him. It won't work. She will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law." He then turned his gaze, which had lost none of its icy fire, on the remaining men. "And now, to the board." His eyes landed on David Morrison. The CEO looked 60 seconds from a heart attack. "David," Harrison said, and the use of his first name was a judgment in itself. "You are a good man. You are a kind man. You are not a leader. You let this infection fester in my company because you were too afraid to ask hard questions. You valued stability over integrity, and in doing so, you nearly cost us both." Morrison stood, his hands shaking. "Harrison, I am so sorry. Clara, Ms. Hayes Donovan, I had no idea. I am terribly, terribly sorry for what he did to you." Clara cut him off, not with malice, but with precision. "David, your job wasn't to have an idea. It was to know. You were the custodian of this firm, and you let the wolves into the nursery. Your apology is noted. Your resignation is accepted. You will leave with your full pension, but you will sign an NDA that ensures you never speak the name Vanguard again." Morrison nodded, utterly broken, and walked out of the room. "Marcus," Harrison said, turning to the last dissenter, "you backed him. You championed his shark mentality. You're out. Clean your desk." "You can't do this," Marcus blustered. "I can," Harrison said. "This entire board is dissolved, effective immediately. It will be reconstituted under the new COO's direction by the end of the day. You can leave on your own, or you can follow Mr. Vance in cuffs for aiding and abetting. Your choice." Marcus Thorne, his face pale, fled the room. Finally they were alone. Just Harrison and Clara in the vast, silent boardroom. The morning sun streamed in, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Harrison let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for 5 years. "Well, Madam Coe," he said, a weary pride in his voice, "your first day has been eventful." Clara walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the city 52 floors below. The same view Julian had prized. "He wasn't the only rot, Dad," she said quietly. "He was just the loudest. The culture here. It's broken. It's what you always taught me not to be." Harrison came to stand beside her, putting a hand on her shoulder. "I know," he said, his voice thick with a rare emotion. "I let it get away from me. I was so busy building the machine, I forgot about the people inside it. I was so afraid of being done, of being irrelevant in retirement. I let profit become a substitute for purpose." He turned to her, his blue eyes searching hers. "That's why you are the new COO, not me. I'm going back into retirement, for real this time. This is your firm now, Clara. Fix it." Clara put her hand over his, her other hand resting on her belly. "I'm scared, Dad. It's so broken. And with the baby." "Your pregnancy isn't a liability, Clara," he said fiercely, echoing her earlier words. "It's a perspective. It's your greatest asset. You're not just building for the next quarter. You're building for the next generation. That's what I lost. That's what you'll bring back. Now, shall we go reintroduce you to your new team?" They walked together to the 50th floor. The atmosphere was a funeral. The entire floor was frozen, watching them. They saw Julian's glass cube, now empty. They saw security guards boxing up Serafina's things from Clara's old desk. Clara walked to the center of the floor. Everyone stared, whispering. "Mary," Clara called out. Mary at her desk looked up, her eyes wide with terror. She thought she was next. She slowly approached. "Clara, Ms. Hayes. Ms. Hayes, Donovan." Clara smiled, a real, warm smile. "Mary, for 8 months, you were the only person on this floor who showed me genuine kindness. You have more integrity in your fingernail than Mr. Vance had in his entire body. You are my new executive administrator. Your title and your pay will reflect your seniority and your value. We start now." Mary's hands flew to her mouth, and she burst into tears of sheer, unadulterated relief. It was the first crack in the ice. That afternoon, Clara held an all-hands town hall in the firm's main atrium. She stood in front of 500 employees, her father standing off to the side, a proud observer. She used no microphone. Her voice, trained in Wharton lecture halls, carried. "My name is Clara Hayes Donovan," she began. "My father, Harrison Hayes, built this firm. For the last 8 months, you knew me as Clara Hayes. On Friday, many of you watched me get fired, humiliated, and escorted from this building. This morning, you watched Mr. Vance get arrested." A nervous murmur went through the crowd. "The era of Vanguard as a shark tank is over," she declared. "Sharks are lazy, solitary predators. They eat their own. From today, we will be a wolf pack. We are intelligent, we are strategic, we are collaborative, and we protect our own. This will be a place of integrity first. Profit second, because integrity, in the long run, is profit." She laid out her new vision. "The rot stops today. I am firing every manager in this firm with a credible HR complaint of bullying or harassment. Their positions will be filled from within. And my first act as COO," she paused, her hand going to her stomach, "is to announce the new Vanguard parental leave policy. 6 months, fully paid, for all employees, mothers, fathers, and adoptive parents, because family is not a liability. It is our foundation." A stunned silence. Then, led by Mary, a slow, building wave of applause that became a roar. The next 6 months were a war. The sharks she fired didn't go quietly. Marcus Thorne's allies tried to sue for wrongful termination. Clara countered, in person, with the meticulous evidence of their complicity and incompetence she had gathered as a secretary. Forbes magazine ran a scathing article titled, "The Heiress's Hobby: Can a Pregnant Idealist Run a Wall Street Firm?" Clara's response was to write a fiery op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, titled, "Yes, she can, and she's doing it." It went viral. She was vilified on financial TV as sentimental and naive, then praised by a new generation as a visionary. The firm's best and brightest, who had been suffocating under the old guard, flocked to her. Profits dipped for 1 quarter, then soared, driven by a new, massive, green energy fund she had personally championed. The legal reckoning was absolute. Serafina Croft, faced with the video and her own paper trail, folded completely. She testified against Julian, detailing his greed and his paranoia. She received 2 years in a low-security federal prison. Julian, blinded by his own narcissism, made the fatal mistake of refusing a plea deal. He was convinced he could charm a jury. The trial was a circus. He painted himself as a visionary, betrayed by a spurned lover and a conniving secretary. But the prosecution had Clara's meticulous notes, the high-definition security footage, and the bank transfers. The jury convicted him on all counts in under 45 minutes. At his sentencing, the judge, a woman in her 60s, looked down at him with contempt. "Mr. Vance," she said, "you are a man of profound arrogance and a complete lack of character. Your crimes were not of passion, but of a cold, calculated greed. But what the court finds most appalling is your cruel and unusual humiliation of an employee in a vulnerable condition. You used a woman's pregnancy as a weapon. You are, in short, a bully. You are sentenced to 8 years in a state penitentiary." He screamed, a high, thin sound of disbelief as he was led away. 8 months after the boardroom coup, the 50th floor was unrecognizable. It was bright. The glass cube of Julian's office had been dismantled, replaced by a large, open-plan collaborative workspace. People were talking, laughing, arguing over whiteboards. Clara sat in her new office, a warmer space with comfortable chairs, on the same floor as her team. She was on a conference call, finalizing the acquisition of a tech startup. Her desk was covered in reports, but also a small, silver-framed sonogram. She was in mid-sentence when she stopped, her breath catching. She smiled, a small, tired but triumphant smile. Mary, now her unflappable chief of staff, noticed immediately. "Ms. Hayes." It is," Clara breathed, closing her laptop. "Call my husband, and tell the Tokyo board. The call will have to be rescheduled for tomorrow morning. My son has decided on an earlier-than-expected arrival." Harrison Hayes met her at the elevator, holding a brand-new baby carrier, beaming. "Ready, Madam Coe?" "More than ready, Dad," she said, squeezing his arm. As the elevator doors closed, the floor didn't panic. They didn't whisper. They stood, and they applauded their leader. Clara Hayes Donovan had built a company that could run without her for a few hours, or a few months. The new foundation was strong. It wasn't built on fear. It was built on trust. What a story of karma and consequences. It just goes to show that you never, ever know who you're talking to. Julian's arrogance and cruelty weren't just his moral failing. They were his financial ruin. He saw a pregnant secretary as a weak, disposable problem, but he was actually abusing the most powerful person in the building. Clara proved that true strength isn't about yelling, bullying, or wearing an expensive suit. It's about intelligence, patience, and knowing exactly when to make your move. She didn't just get revenge. She rebuilt an entire company in her own, stronger image. What did you think of Julian's takedown? Was it satisfying? Let me know in the comments what your favorite part of the story was. If you loved this story, please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to see justice served, and make sure you subscribe to the channel so you never miss another real-life drama. We have new stories coming every week. Thanks for listening.